Welcome to the deep dive. Today we'll be looking at, well, dissecting, I guess you could say, some data from Eurostat about commercial flight trends in the EU. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on 2024. So you sent over some great info here, including like flight numbers, from 2023 and 2024, and comparisons to that pre-pandemic year, 2019, right? As well as a breakdown of different types of commercial flights, like scheduled versus non-scheduled, and even a look at which airports are the busiest across the EU.
Yeah, there really is a lot to unpack here. It's
Yeah.
pretty fascinating stuff, like I don't know, snapshot of how European aviation is bouncing back, changing even, after a pretty turbulent few years.
Definitely, yeah. So maybe we can start with like the big picture. The total number of commercial flights in the EU during 2024 was 6.7 million, which is a jump of, let me see, 5.8% compared to 2023. So does that mean things are like fully back to normal now?
Well, it's definitely a positive sign, a sign of recovery, but 6.7 million is still less than the 7 million flights we saw back in 2019.
Oh.
So, still a bit of a ways to go before we're back to pre-pandemic levels.
That's interesting. Yeah, steady progress, but not quite there yet. One thing that really stood out to me, though, was the data on those like non-scheduled commercial flights, the charter flights, private jets, things like that. They actually made up like almost 9% of all flights in 2024, 8.7% to be exact, which seems like kind of a big deal. What do you think is driving that trend?
What's interesting is when you look closer, this surge in non-scheduled flights, it seems to be pretty heavily linked to, well, vacations, basically, leisure travel. The data shows that the summer months, June, July, August, they saw the biggest increases in those non-scheduled flights, reaching, over 10% each.
So it's like instead of just booking a regular flight through like, one of the big airlines, people are choosing these like more customized travel experiences.
Right, exactly.
I wonder why that is. Is it just about flexibility, like having more control over your itinerary and stuff?
It's definitely part of it, yeah. But I think it goes a little deeper than that. The rise of budget airlines, the fact that they're offering these like really affordable charter flights to all these, popular vacation spots, that's got to be playing a role. And you also got to consider that, more and more people are working remotely these days. They've got more flexible schedules, so they can, travel outside of peak season, which makes those charter flights even more appealing.
Right, that makes total sense. It's like, yeah, a bunch of different factors all coming together to kind of create this shift in how people are traveling. Okay, so let's zoom in a bit on some specific airports. Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport, it was the busiest airport in the entire EU in 2024, with a whopping 484,000 commercial flights. I mean, that's a lot of flights. What makes Amsterdam such a major hub?
I mean, Schiphol's dominance, it's not really a surprise. I mean, its location is just perfect, really, for those connecting flights, especially for international travel. And then they've also, invested heavily in their infrastructure. So it's a very efficient airport, attractive for airlines, for passengers.
Yeah, it's like a well-oiled machine.
Yeah.
Okay, so another interesting data point was Athens International Airport. They had the highest percentage of these non-scheduled flights, like those charter flights we talked about, 5.5% of their total flights. And this was among the top 10 busiest airports in the EU. So what's going on in Athens?
That's a great question. It seems to suggest that Athens is attracting a proportionally larger number of those leisure travelers compared to other major hubs. Could be because it's such a popular tourist destination, especially for people looking for sun, beaches, historical sites, all that.
Right, classic vacation spot.
Exactly. And we're seeing a similar pattern with, Vienna International Airport and Adolfo Suarez Madrid Barajas Airport. They both had high percentages of non-scheduled flights too, both over 4.5%. And those are, cities that are known for their tourism as well.
So it's like we're seeing this trend where, certain airports are becoming these hotspots for leisure travel, while others like Amsterdam are more like these major hubs for all sorts of different travel purposes. Is this like a sign of things to come, you think?
It definitely raises an interesting question. Yeah, like, are we seeing a fundamental shift in how people are using air travel? Are we moving toward a future where airports specialize in certain types of travel?
That's a really good point. It's like each airport is finding its own little niche,
Yeah.
within that larger aviation ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. And, that brings up another thought. Could this specialization lead to more competition between airports? Like, will we start to see airports actively marketing themselves to specific types of travelers, like business travelers or vacationers?
Wow, this is getting really interesting. We started with some, pretty simple flight numbers, and now we're talking about the potential future of how airports operate and compete with each other. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, maybe we should take a closer look at what this whole shift towards leisure travel, what it actually means for the European aviation industry as a whole.
Welcome back to our deep dive into European aviation. We've been, kind of digging into some interesting trends in the data, especially the rise of leisure travel and how, like, certain airports are specializing in different types of travel. But, we can't really ignore the big issues here, right? Like fuel prices and sustainability. These are major challenges for any aviation industry, really,
Yeah.
especially one as, large, interconnected as the EU's.
Right. Those are huge factors. I mean, fuel prices always seem to be going up and down, and there's, this constant pressure to reduce the environmental impact of flying. So how are they shaping the future of European aviation, do you think?
Well, for one thing, airlines are really feeling the pressure to become more fuel efficient. They're investing in newer planes that use less fuel,
Wow.
and they're optimizing flight routes to try and reduce consumption. But it's tough,
Yeah.
especially with how unpredictable those global energy markets are.
Yeah, it's a moving target. And then there's the whole sustainability issue, right? I mean, you can't really just ignore the environmental impact of millions of flights going all over the place.
Exactly. That's why we're seeing a big push towards sustainable aviation fuels and new technologies.
Mm.
Electric and hybrid planes are being developed, and they're being tested. But it'll be a while before those are, widely
Yeah.
used. And, there's also a growing interest in carbon offsetting and other ways to kind of mitigate the environmental impact.
So it's like a multi-pronged approach, right?
Right.
Reduce fuel consumption, develop greener technologies, and then offset whatever impact is left over. I imagine all this is pretty expensive, though.
Oh, absolutely. These initiatives require, major investment from airlines, from governments, and it's a delicate balance, really. I mean, on the one hand, you've got the economic benefits of, a strong aviation industry, which supports, tourism, trade, jobs. But on the other hand, you have to address climate change. You have to reduce emissions. It's a tough equation to solve.
Yeah, it's like trying to, I don't know, fly a plane and fix the engine at the same time. You got to keep things moving forward, but you also need to make like these fundamental changes to how things work.
That's a great analogy, and I think it really highlights the importance of, collaboration and innovation in this industry. Airlines, governments, researchers, even passengers. Everyone needs to work together to find solutions that make sense economically, but are also, good for the environment.
So what about like individual passengers, like you and me? What can we actually do to contribute to a more sustainable future for aviation?
Well, I think, we can start by making more conscious choices about how we fly and when. Like maybe consider taking the train for shorter distances, especially if there's, a good rail network. And when you do have to fly, try to book direct flights because those takeoffs and landings, those are the most fuel-intensive parts of the journey.
Right, yeah. Those are some good tips. Makes you wonder if flying will like become less common in the future, even as, the world becomes more and more interconnected.
It's definitely a possibility.
Mm.
As technology gets better and better, we might see, virtual meetings and other forms of remote communication
Mm.
replacing some of that business travel. And who knows, maybe one day virtual reality will be so good that you can experience, the Eiffel Tower from your living room without ever leaving home.
That's a wild thought. But even if virtual travel becomes a thing, I think there's always going to be something special about actually being in a new place,
Mhm.
experiencing different cultures firsthand.
Oh, absolutely. There's a certain magic to travel that you just can't replicate virtually. But that doesn't mean we can just forget about sustainability. The challenge is to find a balance
Yeah.
between that joy of travel and the responsibility we have to protect our planet.
Speaking of responsibility, let's go back to the data for a second. We've been talking about these overall trends, but I'm curious what this data tells us about, individual countries within the EU. Are there any like big differences in how different countries are approaching aviation?
There are, yeah. For instance, Greece.
Mm.
They had the highest percentage of those non-scheduled flights in 2024 at 10.3%, followed by Portugal at 9.1%, which isn't surprising, really. I mean, both countries are heavily reliant on tourism, and they've got a really well-developed infrastructure for charter flights. On the other hand, Luxembourg and Finland, they had much lower percentages of non-scheduled flights, both under 3%. Could be because of things like their location,
Yeah.
their economic focus, or even, cultural preferences when it comes to
Yeah,
travel.
right. Makes sense. Every country has its own like unique situation, and that's going to influence how they approach aviation. What about the EU as a whole, though? Are there any like big initiatives or policies aimed at shaping the future of European aviation?
Yeah, the EU is definitely pushing for a more sustainable and interconnected aviation sector.
Yeah.
There are, some pretty ambitious goals for reducing emissions,
Hmm.
promoting the development and adoption of sustainable aviation fuels, and modernizing air traffic management systems. They're also investing in high-speed rail networks and other, alternative modes of transportation to create a more integrated and efficient transportation system overall.
So it sounds like the EU is, trying to take a comprehensive approach, tackling the challenges, taking advantage of the opportunities as the aviation landscape changes. But what does all this mean for the average traveler? How will these changes affect their flying experience in the coming years? Welcome back to the last part of our deep dive into European aviation. We've covered a lot from, flight trends to airport specialization to fuel prices and sustainability. But there's one really important thing we haven't talked about yet. The human side of all of this.
You're absolutely right. It's easy to focus on the numbers, and forget that behind every flight, behind every data point, there are people, real people with their own, stories and reasons for flying.
Yeah, exactly. So let's zoom in on those individual experiences for a minute. What can we learn about the people who are flying in and out of the EU? What are they hoping for? What are they worried about? Why are they traveling?
Well, think about those, those non-scheduled flights we talked about.
Hmm.
A lot of those passengers are probably, families or groups of friends going on vacation, excited to explore new places or relax on a beach somewhere.
Right, and then on the scheduled flights, you've got, business travelers, people going to see family or friends, students going back and forth to university, maybe even, adventurers looking for something new.
It's really a mix of human stories.
Yeah, all connected by this data we've been looking at. It's a good reminder that aviation isn't just about, getting from one place to another. It's about connecting people, connecting cultures.
Absolutely.
It's about that feeling you get when you step on a plane, knowing that you're about to go on an adventure, or that feeling of, I don't know, wonder when you look out the window and you see the world below.
Yeah, and those moments of pure joy, like when you see your loved ones at the arrival gate,
Hmm.
or when you step off the plane into a new city.
Those are the things that make aviation so special, so human. It's not just about the planes and the airports. It's about the people.
Exactly. And as we move towards a future of more sustainable aviation, it's important to keep those human stories in mind. We want to make sure that flying remains accessible and enjoyable for everyone, while also, doing what we can to protect the environment.
It's a balancing act for sure, finding that sweet spot between technology and human connection.
Right. And that brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. We've spent this episode exploring the trends, the challenges, the opportunities that are shaping European aviation. But ultimately, the future of this industry, it's in your hands. The choices you make as a traveler, the questions you ask, the expectations you have, all those things will influence how aviation evolves in the years to come.
So stay informed, stay curious, and most importantly, keep exploring. The world is a big and amazing place, and aviation has the power to connect us all.
Well said. And on that note, it's time for us to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this journey through the world of European aviation.
Until next time, safe travels.